A woman sat on a park bench in the town square of Carverton, Michigan, on a morning so cold the breath left her mouth like something escaping. She held $15 in her right hand, not in a wallet, not folded neatly in a pocket. She held the bills flat against her palm, a 10 and a 5 creased and soft, from years of other people's pockets, and she stared at them the way a person stares at the last match in a box. Behind her, in a rusted Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and a heater that hadn't worked since October, but two children sat waiting. The girl was 17, the boy was 14. Their eyes carried the particular kind of tiredness that does not come from lack of sleep, but from watching a parent try to hold together something that has already broken. In less than 2 hours, that woman would walk into a government building and do something that every person in that room would call insane. She would raise her hand and offer $15 for a house the city had condemned. A house no one wanted, a house people said should be torn down and forgotten. They would laugh at her. They would take photographs and post them online with captions designed to sting. Her ex-husband would see those posts and add his own. But what none of them knew, not the developers in their pressed shirts, not the mayor in his leather chair, not the ex-husband who had taken everything she'd built and called it his, was that beneath the rotting floorboards of that condemned house, a dead man had buried the truth. And that truth had been waiting 130 years for someone desperate enough to find it. Before we go any further, if stories like this mean something to you, stories about people the world counted out, people who refuse to stay down, take a moment and subscribe. Join this family, because what Nora Ellsworth found beneath that house will stay with you long after tonight. Her name was Nora Ellsworth, and she was 42 years old. And she had been for 18 years the kind of a wife who disappears into her husband's life so completely that when the marriage ends, there is almost nothing left of her own. She had met Colton Ellsworth at 24, fresh from community college, with a half-finished teaching degree and the quiet belief that the world would eventually make room for her plans. Colton was 34, confident in the way that men with money and good teeth are often confident, and he ran a real estate development company that was growing faster than he could staff it. He needed someone to manage the chaos at home. Nora needed someone to believe she was enough. They found each other at a fundraiser diner in Traverse City. He told her she had the kind of calm that made other people feel safe. She told herself that was love. They married in June. Iris arrived the following spring, a fierce-eyed girl who came into the world screaming and never really stopped asking questions. Theodore Teddy came 3 years later, quieter, watchful. The kind of boy who noticed when his mother's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Nora left her teaching program. Just for a year, she told herself. Just until the baby sleeps through the night. But the year became two, and two became five, and five became a decade. And somewhere in the accumulation of school lunches and client dinners and mortgage refinancings and holiday cards, addressed in her handwriting, but signed with both their names, Nora's own ambitions became so small she could no longer see them. Colton's company grew. They moved to Carverton, a small town in northern Lower Michigan that Colton said was ripe for development. Old lumber money Victorian architecture, a main street that still looked like a postcard from 1920. He bought properties. He renovated storefronts. He became the kind of man whose name appeared in the local paper under headlines that used the word visionary. Nora raised the children, managed the household, hosted dinners for Colton's investors, balanced the books when his assistant quit, and never once put her own name on anything. Then in the spring of her 41st year, Colton sat across from her at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, while Iris was at a friend's house and Teddy was in his room building something with scrap wood, and he told her he was leaving. He did not raise his voice. He did not cry. He explained in the same measured tone he used when presenting a development proposal that he felt confined by domestic obligations and needed to pursue personal growth. He had already spoken with a lawyer, several lawyers, in fact. The divorce took 8 months. It took 8 months because Colton had spent years moving assets into LLCs and trusts and business entities that were technically not marital property. The house was in a company name. The cars were leased through the business. The savings accounts had been quietly emptied into investment vehicles that Nora had signed off on without reading, because Colton had said, "Trust me," and she had. Her lawyer, a public defender named Garrett Fielding, who handled her case pro bono because she couldn't afford even a consultation fee, did everything he could. But Garrett was one man with a cluttered desk and a caseload that would have broken someone less stubborn. Colton had 3 attorneys from a firm in Grand Rapids who billed more per hour than Garrett made in a day. The result was what results always are when power meets its absence. Nora walked away with custody of both children, a settlement of $3,000 and the hollow right to keep her married name, which she did not want but could not afford to change. $3,000, that was what 18 years of her life was worth, according to the courts of the state of Michigan. She used it to rent a small apartment on the east side of Carverton, the side where the paint peeled and the sidewalks cracked and the people who worked at Colton's developments could not afford to live in them. The money lasted 3 months. Food for 3, school supplies, a winter coat for Teddy, who had grown 4 inches since September, shoes for Iris, whose old ones had split along the sole. By November, the 3,000 was gone and the rent was due, and Nora had applied for every job within 30 miles and been told in various polite ways that an 18-year gap in employment was difficult to overlook. She had $15 left, a 10 and a 5. She kept them in her coat pocket, not in her wallet, because her wallet was empty, and the weight of an empty wallet felt worse than the weight of nothing at all. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. 3 days. She had 3 days to vacate or face legal proceedings. Nora read the notice twice, folded it, placed it in the kitchen drawer, and made dinner for her children, as if nothing had changed. Iris knew. Iris always knew. She had taken a job at a coffee shop on Main Street, telling the owner she was 18 when she was not, and she brought home tips in a jar that she left on the counter without comment. Teddy knew too, though he showed it differently. He had stopped asking for things. He wore shoes that were 2 sizes too small and walked to school without complaining. And when Nora noticed him limping slightly one evening, he said his feet were fine, just tired from gym class. They were good children. They deserved a mother who could give them more than silence and a kitchen drawer full of notices. On the morning of November 14th, with 2 days remaining before eviction, Nora sat on the bench in the town square because the apartment felt like a coffin and the cold outside was at least honest. She held the $15 and tried to think. Her parents were in Arizona, elderly, surviving on Social Security checks that barely covered their own rent. Her sister had died 6 years ago. Her friends, the ones she'd had when she was Mrs. Colton Ellsworth, had all chosen Colton's side, which was the side with the dinner parties and the ski trips and the Christmas bonuses. There was no one to call. There was nowhere to go. That is when she saw the banner. It hung between 2 lampposts across the square, slightly crooked. The kind of municipal announcement that nobody reads. City of Carverton condemned property auction today, 2 p.m. City Hall. Nora had driven past these banners before, back when she lived on the good side of town, and had no reason to care about condemned properties. The city seized buildings for unpaid taxes or code violations and auctioned them to recoup costs. Developers bought them. Men like Colton bought them. They were not meant for women sitting on benches with $15. But Nora read the banner again, and a thought entered her mind. That was either the stupidest thought she had ever had or the bravest. Maybe there would be something at that auction so broken, so unwanted, so beyond repair, that no one with money would bother. Maybe there would be a structure, any structure with a roof and walls and a door that locked where her children could sleep without an eviction notice counting down above their heads. It was desperate. She knew that. But desperation, she was learning, had its own clarity. At 2 o'clock, Nora walked into the auction room on the second floor of City Hall. It was a wood-paneled space that smelled of old coffee and municipal carpet, and it was filled with approximately 30 people, almost all men, almost all wearing the kind of business casual clothing that suggested money held loosely. She recognized several of them. Developers from Colton's circle, men who had sat at her dining table and eaten her cooking and complimented her pot roast, and were now looking at her with expressions that moved quickly from confusion to recognition to amusement. She saw one of them pull out his phone. She saw another lean toward his neighbor and whisper something that made them both smile. She sat in the back row. She folded her hands in her lap. She waited. The auctioneer was a city official named Frank Bosworth, a broad man with a voice that sounded like it had been used too much and enjoyed too little. He moved through the properties efficiently. A vacant lot went for $9,000. A commercial building with structural issues went for $38,000. A residential property near the lake went for $25,000. Numbers that existed in a world Nora no longer inhabited. She was about to stand and leave. The $15 suddenly absurd a child's piggy bank in a room full of checkbooks when Bosworth called the final item. His voice carried the particular flatness of a man reading something he considers a waste of his time. Last property today. Olmsted Road. Condemned residential structure on 2 acres. Built also at 91. Abandoned since 1985. Severe structural damage, significant code violations, no utilities. Property sold as is where is no warranties. The city wants this off the books. Opening bid, let's say $500. Nobody moved. Nora understood why. Olmsted Road was on the far side of Carverton, past the railroad tracks, past the old lumber mill in the part of town that the development money had never reached. She had driven through it once years ago and remembered overgrown fields, leaning fences, a road that seemed to lead nowhere useful. Bosworth tried again. 300. Come on, folks, 2 acres. That's got to interest somebody. Silence. The developers were checking phones, gathering quotes. 100, the city is authorized to go as low as necessary. We just need this property transferred. More silence. Bosworth sighed. It was the sigh of a man who has done this before and knows how it ends. Fine. What will someone give me for 2 acres and a condemned house? Nora's hand went up. The motion surprised her. It came from somewhere below, thought below reason, from the place where mothers make decisions that have nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the fact that their children need a roof. $15. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. Before it had been the silence of disinterest. Now it was the silence of disbelief. Then someone in the third row laughed. Then someone else. Then the whole room was laughing, not cruelly, not exactly, more the way people laugh when something is so far outside the boundaries of normal behavior that laughter is the only available response. Bosworth looked at her. His face held an expression she would remember for years, not mockery, but something closer to bewilderment. Ma'am, did you say $15? Yes. Nora's voice was steady. $15. It's what I have. You said as low as necessary. No one else wants it. Bosworth looked around the room. Anybody care to counter? Nothing. The laughter had spent itself. Then 1247 Olmsted Road, condemned structure on 2 acres, sold for $15. See the clerk for your paperwork. The laughter resumed softer now as Nora walked to the clerk's desk at the side of the room. She heard fragments behind her. $15 for a death trap. Colton's ex bought a coffin. Someone should call Adult Protective Services. She signed the paperwork with the hands that trembled, but did not stop. The clerk was a woman of about 60 named Alma Ogden, with reading glasses on a chain and eyes that had seen decades of municipal transactions. She processed the paperwork with professional efficiency, but when she handed Nora the deed, her voice dropped. You know this property is condemned. You cannot legally occupy it until it meets code. The city has been trying to demolish it for years, but the paperwork got lost in the system. I understand. Nora took the deed, but it's mine. Alma studied her for a moment. Then she reached into a drawer and pulled out a small envelope yellowed with age, the kind of envelope that has been sitting in a filing cabinet so long it has become part of the furniture. This was in the original property file. Been there since before I started this job, and I've been here 31 years. It's marked for the owner, but there hasn't been an owner to give it to, until now. Inside the envelope was a key, not a modern key, an iron skeleton key, heavy and dark, with a bow shaped like a clover and teeth worn smooth by time. It looked like something from a century ago. There was no note, no explanation, just the key and the envelope and the faded handwriting that read for the owner. Nora held the key in one hand and the deed in the other, and walked out of City Hall while people behind her snapped photographs on their phones. By evening, the story was everywhere. Woman buys condemned house for $15. The post spread through Carverton's social media with the speed of small-town mockery. Photos of Nora at the auction desk. Photos of the house pulled from county records looking like something from a horror film. Comments that ranged from pity to cruelty. Colton had weighed in on someone's post, and I thought her decisions couldn't get worse. Good luck with that investment, Nora. It had 200 likes by the time Iris saw it. Iris came to Nora that evening in the apartment, her face tight, her phone in her hand. She held it up so Nora could see the screen. Everyone is making fun of you. Everyone, Mom. Dad's commenting. People from school are sharing it. Why did you do this? Nora took the phone. Read. Colton's comments said it face down on the counter. She looked at her daughter and spoke with a calm she did not entirely feel. Get your brother. Pack everything we own, which will not take long. We are moving tonight. Moving where? To that house, Mama, people are saying. It's falling apart. They're saying the roof is caving in. Iris, we are being evicted in 2 days. That house, whatever it is, belongs to us. No one can kick us out of something we own. Get Teddy. We're leaving now. The drive took 20 minutes through parts of Carverton that the tourist brochures did not mention. Olmsted Road was a cracked 2-lane that ran past the old lumber mill, past a field of rusted equipment, past a few scattered houses that looked barely inhabited. The road narrowed as it went, the trees pressing closer. White pines and old oaks and the skeletal branches of maples that had already dropped their leaves. The sky was pewter. The air smelled like wood smoke and approaching snow. When Nora turned into the driveway of 1247, she stopped the car and sat very still. The house was worse than she had imagined. It was a 2-story Victorian that might have been beautiful once, gingerbread trim, a wraparound porch, tall windows designed to catch the light. But beauty neglected long enough becomes its own kind of ruin. The roof sagged at its center like a spine giving way. Half the windows were gone, just dark openings in a gray face. The porch tilted forward at an angle that suggested the foundation had shifted years ago and no one had cared enough to notice. The siding, once white, had weathered to the color of old bone, hanging off in strips that moved slightly in the wind. Vines had claimed the eastern wall, entirely crawling through the broken windows, reaching upward, as if the house were being slowly swallowed by the ground it stood on. The yard was waist-high weeds and wild grass gone to seed. An oak tree, massive and ancient, stood to the left of the house, its lowest branch thick enough to sit on. In the failing November light, the whole property looked less like a place where people had lived and more like a place where living had been tried and abandoned. From the back seat, Teddy spoke quietly. "Mom, we can't live here." I was not being dramatic. He was stating what he saw, and what he saw was a structure that looked from the outside as if it might collapse if someone closed the door too hard. Nora gripped the steering wheel. She felt it then, the full weight of what she had done. She had spent her last $15 on this. She had dragged her children across town to stand in front of a ruin. She had nothing left. No money, no options, no clever backup plan. Just a condemned house and iron key she did not understand. And two children in the back seat who were counting on her to be something she was not sure she was. Behind them a truck slowed on the road. A voice called through the open window. "Nice place, Nora. Heard you got a real bargain." Laughter. The truck accelerated away. Nora wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She opened the car door. "Out. Both of you. Grab everything. We're going in." Mom, Iris began. "Listen to me. Both of you. Yes, it's bad. Yes, it's scary. But it is ours. No one can take this from us. No landlord, no judge, no ex-husband. We are going to find the safest room in this house, and we are going to sleep there tonight. Tomorrow we figure out the next thing. But tonight we sleep under our own roof. Ours. Do you understand?" They understood. They got out. Teddy carried 2 garbage bags of clothing. Iris carried a backpack and a grocery bag of canned food. Nora carried a blanket, a flashlight, and the iron skeleton key in her coat pocket where the $15 had been that morning. The front door was heavy, warped by decades of Michigan weather. The skeleton key from Alma's envelope did not fit this lock. It was too old, too ornate. But the modern lock had rusted through, and Nora pushed the door open with her shoulder. It groaned on hinges that had not moved in 40 years. They stepped inside. The smell was immediate. Mold and rot, and the stale, particular scent of air that has been sealed too long in the company of decay. Nora swept her flashlight across the entry hall. The floor was wide plank hardwood buried under dirt and debris, but solid underfoot. To the left, a parlor with a collapsed bookshelf. To the right, a dining room with peeling wallpaper and a window that was just a rectangle of cold. Ahead, a staircase that Nora looked at and immediately decided they would not use. "Stay on the first floor. Don't touch the walls where the plaster is bulging. Watch for weak spots in the floor." They moved through the house slowly, room by room. The flashlight cutting a narrow path through decades of abandonment. The kitchen was destroyed, cabinets hanging open, a sink stained brown, a ceiling that had partially collapsed, letting in a column of gray sky. But off the back of the kitchen, Nora found what she needed. A small room, probably a pantry or a servant's quarters when the house was built, with a door that closed and a floor that held firm when she stomped on it, and walls that were plaster over brick solid, dry, intact. "Here, this is where we stay tonight." They cleaned the room with what they had, rags from the car. A broom Teddy found leaning against a wall in the hallway. They spread blankets on the floor. Nora had one candle in the grocery bag, a votive in a glass jar, left over from a time when she'd bought candles for ambience instead of necessity. She lit it and placed it in the center of the room. The light was small, but it was warm, and it pushed the darkness to the corners, and it turned the 3 of them into something that looked, in that gentle glow, almost like a painting. Mother and 2 children sitting on the floor of a house the world had given up on, circled around a single flame. Iris was the first to speak. Her voice was different now. Not angry, not accusatory, just tired and young and afraid. "What are we going to do, Mom?" Nora reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out the iron skeleton key and turned it in the candlelight. The metal caught the flame and held it. "I don't know yet, but this house is 130 years old. It has survived storms and winters and neglect and being forgotten by everyone. If it can last this long, so can we. Iris didn't answer, but she leaned closer to the candle, and after a while she slept. Teddy was already asleep, curled on his side with his two small shoes still on because the floor was cold. Nora sat awake in the candlelight, the key in her hand, and listened to the house settle around her. Wind in the broken windows, the creak of old joists adjusting to the cold. Small sounds behind the walls, mice probably, or squirrels that had claimed the house as their own long before Nora arrived. It was not silence. It was the sound of something very old continuing to exist. She looked at the key. For the owner, the envelope had said. She did not know what it opened. She did not know why Alma had kept it for 31 years. She did not know what waited in this house beyond mold and heartbreak, and the story she had not yet heard. But she knew this. She had made a choice. Not a smart choice, possibly. Not a safe one. But a choice, and it was hers and no one. Not Colton, not the court, not the laughing man at the auction had made it for her. For the first time in 18 years, she had decided something entirely on her own. The candle burned down slowly. The shadows on the wall shifted and softened. Somewhere outside, snow began to fall. The first snow of the season, light and quiet, covering the overgrown yard and the sagging roof, and the cracked steps of the porch in a thin white layer that made everything look for a moment like it might be new. The first week was a study in survival. They lived in the pantry room, venturing out during daylight to assess the house and retreating before dark. There was no running water, the pipes had burst years ago. No electricity, disconnected in 1985. No heat beyond what their bodies generated, and the single blanket they shared. November in northern Michigan meant nighttime temperatures that dropped below freezing. And Nora woke each morning with stiff fingers and a determination that felt less like courage and more like the absence of alternatives. She established a routine because routine was the only architecture she could build. Mornings drive to the gas station 2 miles up the road to fill water jugs and charge phones. Midday clean. Evenings eat what they had, canned soup heated on a camping stove Iris bought with tip money and plan. She kept a notebook. Things that need fixing, everything. Things that can wait, nothing. Things we can do ourselves, unknown. She wrote these lists by candlelight, and the list grew longer each day. But the act of writing them made the impossible feel slightly less so. Teddy discovered tools in the overgrown yard. An old hammer with a cracked handle, a crowbar, a rusted saw left behind by whoever had last tried to care for this place and given up. He brought them inside and cleaned them with the same quiet thoroughness he applied to everything. Iris, despite her anger, despite the posts she kept seeing on her phone, began helping. She boarded broken windows with scrap wood Teddy salvaged from a collapsed shed behind the house. The boards were crooked and the nails bent, but they kept out the wind, and keeping out the wind was enough. The mockery continued. A truck slowing on the road, a shouted comment, the sound of laughter fading with the engine. Someone created a social media page called Nora's Mansion, where people from Carverton posted jokes about the house and bets about how long she would last. Colton was tagged in every post. He never asked them to stop. But Nora cleaned, not because she had a plan, not because she believed cleaning would fix anything, but because filth was the one enemy she could fight with her hands, and fighting kept her warm. She started in the pantry room, scrubbing the floor with water hauled from a stream on the property and soap from the dollar store. She scrubbed until the wood showed grain she hadn't known was there, oak honey-colored, still beautiful under 40 years of grime. She cleaned the walls. She swept cobwebs from corners. When that room was done, she moved to the next one, then the next. Each room was a small war, and each clean floor was a small victory. And the small victories accumulated like snow on a rooftop light, individually heavy together. 2 weeks in, a Tuesday, Nora was in the dining room pulling up carpet. It was rotted through, matted with decades of moisture and animal habitation, the smell so thick it had weight. But underneath there would be hardwood, and hardwood could be salvaged. She had pulled up about half the carpet, working from the doorway toward the far wall, when she noticed something. In the corner where the carpet was still attached, there was a line in the floor that did not belong. The floorboards throughout the room ran east to west, a parallel consistent. But in this corner, a rectangular section roughly 3 feet by 3 feet had been cut separately. The edges were clean. The wood was the same species, but a slightly different shade, as if it had been installed at a different time. A seam ran around all 4 sides. She pulled the carpet back further. The rectangle was unmistakable. A trapdoor. Old iron hinges on one side, barely visible under decades of tarnish, but their deliberate functional design to open. Her heartbeat changed. She could feel it in her throat. Teddy, Riss, come here. They came quickly. She showed them what she'd found. Together they cleared the remaining carpet. Teddy knelt and ran his fingers along the seam, feeling for a latch, a handle, anything. There was none. The surface was flush with the surrounding floor. The crowbar, Nora said. Teddy brought it. He worked the flat end into the seam on the hinge opposite side, gentle at first, then harder. The door resisted, held by rust and time, then broke free with a sound like a sigh. It swung upward on its hinges, releasing air that was cool and dry, and old air that smelled not of rot, but of stone and stillness and patience. Below was darkness. Wooden stairs descended roughly 8 feet into what appeared to be a cellar. The stairs were solid, thick oak, darker than the floor above, built by someone who had meant them to last. Let me go first, Nora said. If it's safe, you two come down. She took her phone, turned on the flashlight, and descended. The stairs held. At the bottom, she found herself in a small room 12 feet square, maybe less. The ceiling was low enough that she could nearly touch it with her hand raised. The walls were stone and brick, carefully laid, sealed with something that had kept the moisture out for over a century. Unlike the house above, this space was dry, remarkably dry. Someone had built this room to endure, to protect what was inside it. In the center of the room was a wooden table. Oak like the stairs, like the floor above. On the table sat 2 objects. The first was a leather-bound book, thick its cover, darkened by age but intact, preserved by the dry air of the sealed cellar. The initials on the cover pressed into the leather in a fading gold read JWC. The second object was a box, heavy, carved from dark wood, walnut perhaps, with iron reinforcements at the corners and an iron clasp at the front. The clasp was held shut by a lock, a small iron lock with a keyhole shaped like a clover. Nora reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out the skeleton key Alma Ogden had given her 2 weeks ago. She looked at the lock. She looked at the key. The bow of the key was shaped like a clover. The keyhole was shaped like a clover. Her hands were shaking. She had to steady them by pressing the key against her palm, the same palm that had held $15 on a bench in the town square. The same palm that had signed a deed while people laughed behind her. Behind her, the same palm that had scrubbed floors and hammered nails and held her children's faces in the dark. She inserted the key. It turned. The lock released with a sound so quiet it could have been imagined. She opened the box first. Inside, wrapped in layers of oilcloth that had preserved them against a century of time, were documents. A land deed dated 1888, filed with the state of Michigan, recorded in Lansing, showing Josiah Whitfield Crawford as the legal owner of 320 acres of land, encompassing what was now, according to modern maps, the entirety of downtown Carverton. Survey maps, bills of sale, correspondence with state officials, and a trust document filed with the state court. Not the local one, establishing that ownership of the 320 acres would remain in trust until claimed by a Crawford heir, or if no heirs existed, by whoever owned and occupied the house at 1247 Homestead Road. Then she opened the journal. The first page, in handwriting that was beautiful and furious and precise, read, The journal of Josiah Whitfield Crawford began this day, January the 14th, 1891. Nora sat on the cellar floor and read by the light of her phone. Crawford had been a lumber baron from Philadelphia who came to Michigan during the great timber boom. He had bought 320 acres of prime forest and lakefront land in 1888. Intending to build a family estate and a small empire of sawmills, he had built this house. He had planted the oak in the yard. He had carved this cellar with his own hands as a vault for his most important possessions. But the local businessmen of Carverton, jealous, corrupt, connected, had conspired against him. They had created fraudulent documents claiming Crawford's land purchase was invalid, that the land belonged to the township for public use. They had taken him to court. And because they controlled the local government, the local judges, the local records, they had won. Crawford had been forced out, stripped of everything but this house on 2 acres, which they allowed him to keep because it was, to them, worthless. Crawford had been old by then, sick with the kind of bitterness that settles in the lungs and does not leave. He could not fight them directly, so he had done something else. He had taken the original deed, the real one, filed with the state, predating all the fraudulent local claims by 3 years, and he had sealed it in this box, in this cellar, in this house. They had let him keep because they thought it was worthless. One entry dated March 1892 made Nora's breath stop in her chest. They will steal my land. They will build their town upon my timber and my soil. They will believe they have prevailed. But the truth rests here beneath their feet, waiting. I have placed it where proud men will never look, in a house they despise, in a cellar they do not know exists, locked with a key they will never hold. Someday someone will come to this house, not because it is valuable, but because they have nowhere else to go. And that person, that desperate, dismissed, underestimated soul will find what I have left. And on that day, the descendants of thieves will answer for what their fathers stole. Nora closed the journal. She sat very still in the cellar that Josiah Crawford had carved from stone, and silence and rage and patience. She held the key in one hand and the deed in the other, and she understood with a clarity that felt like standing in cold water what she was holding. She owned this house. She owned the 2 acres beneath it. And according to documents that had waited 130 years in the dark, she also owned the 320 acres that now contain the shopping center, the office buildings, the restaurants, City Hall itself. Everything that made Carverton a town. She had bought it for $15. Iris's voice came from above at the top of the stairs, thin with worry. Mom, are you okay down there? Nora looked up. The rectangle of light from the dining room above framed her daughter's face, and for a moment Iris looked exactly as she had as a small child, peering over the edge of something, waiting for her mother to tell her it was safe. Safe. Come down, both of you. Come see what Josiah Crawford left for us. They descended. She showed them the journal, the documents, the deed. She explained what it meant, slowly, carefully, watching their faces change. Iris read the trust clause 3 times. Teddy held the survey map up to the phone light and compared it to the county map on his screen, and his eyes went wide. Nora's voice came quiet, almost a whisper. The people who laughed at us are standing on our land. Every building in downtown Carverton is built on property that legally belongs to whoever owns this house. And we own this house. She looked at her children. They looked at her. The cellar was cold and the light was thin, and the house above them was still condemned, still rotting, still a joke to everyone who drove past it. But beneath them, in a box that had waited longer than any of them had been alive, the truth was patient and undeniable, and theirs. Iris spoke first, and her voice held something Nora had not heard in months. Not hope exactly, but the space where hope could land. What do we do now? Now, Nora said, we find a lawyer, and we do not tell anyone what we found. Not yet. Not until we are ready. Because the people who built this town on stolen land have money and lawyers and power. And we have $15 and the dead man's journal. and a key that fits a lock nobody knew existed. And that for the moment is enough. She slipped the iron key back into her coat pocket. It rested there, heavy and warm from her hand, in the same place the $15 had been. The dollars were gone, spent, traded for a deed transformed. But the key remained, and somewhere in its weight, in its clover-shaped bow and its century-old teeth, was the outline of a door that had not yet been opened. Nora did not sleep that night. She sat in the cellar with the journal open across her knees and read every entry Josiah Crawford had written in the last year of his life. The handwriting changed as the pages progressed, steady and precise at the start, then looser, more urgent. The letters tilting as if the hand that wrote them was losing its argument with time. Crawford had known he was dying. He had known no heir would come. He had known the house would be abandoned, forgotten, dismissed. And he had sealed his evidence underground anyway, because he believed, with the kind of faith that only wronged men possess, that truth outlasts the people who bury it. By morning, Nora had a plan. Not a good plan, not a complete one, but a shape, a direction, a first step. She needed Garrett Fielding. She drove to his office on her last quarter tank of gas. The office was on the second floor of a building on Elm Street that also housed a tax preparer and a chiropractor. And the stairwell smelled like old carpet and someone's reheated lunch. Garrett's door was open. He was behind a desk stacked with files in a room that was too small for the furniture it contained. He looked up when she knocked, and his face did what faces do when they recognize someone they once failed. A flicker of guilt, quickly managed, replaced by professional composure. Nora did not waste time. She spread Crawford's documents across his desk, the way a surgeon lays out instruments. Deed first, then survey, maps, then trust, then the journal open to the entry dated March 1892. She stood back and let him read. Garrett read slowly. He picked up the deed and held it to the window light. He turned pages of the trust, with the careful fingers of a man who understands that what he is touching might be either a miracle or an elaborate trap. He made 2 phone calls, one to the state archives in Lansing, one to a colleague who specialized in property law, speaking quietly, asking precise questions, writing nothing down. Then he set the phone on the desk and looked at Nora with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was not the expression of the overworked public defender who had apologized after her divorce for not being able to do more. It was the expression of a man who has just been shown the location of a door he did not know existed. The state deed is on file, recorded 1888, 3 years before any local claim. The trust is filed with the state circuit court, not the county, specifically to survive local interference. The survey boundaries match current municipal maps within acceptable margin of error. Nora waited. "This is real," he said, and his voice carried a weight it had not carried during the divorce proceedings. "You have a legitimate quiet title claim to 320 acres. That includes approximately 80% of Carverton's commercial district, the land under the shopping center, the office buildings on Main Street, City Hall itself. What happens when we file?" Garrett leaned back. "War. Every property owner in downtown will fight this. The city will fight it. Harlan Dunn, you know who he is," Nora knew. Everyone in Carverton knew Harlan Dunn. He owned the shopping center, half the commercial lots on Main Street, and the kind of influence that comes not from elected office, but from being the man who funds the people who hold it. Dunn will come after you with everything he has. His lawyers are expensive. This will be long. I can't pay you. You know that, I know. Garrett picked up the trust document and read the inheritance clause one more time. Then he set it down and looked at her directly. "Contingency. I take this case for a percentage of whatever you recover. If we lose, I get nothing. If we win, I get paid from the settlement. And if they drag it out for years, then we endure for years. But Sarah, He stopped. Nora, forgive me, old habit. Nora, they will not want this going to trial. Once we establish that the claim is valid, the settlement pressure will be enormous. Every business in downtown is operating on land they don't legally own. The liability exposure is catastrophic. They will settle because the alternative is losing everything. When can you file? Give me 1 week. I want the filing to be perfect. Every challenge anticipated, every argument preemptively answered. When we walk into court, I want the other side to know immediately that this is not a nuisance suit. Nora stood. She extended her hand. He shook it. Mr. Fielding, when this is over, I will make sure you are compensated far beyond whatever percentage we agree on, because you are the second person in this town who has treated me like I matter. The first was a woman at the clerk's desk who gave me a key she'd been holding for 31 years. Who was the first person to treat you like you didn't? Nora paused at the door. Everyone, she said simply. For a very long time. She drove back to the house with the gas light on. When she pulled into the driveway, there was a pickup truck parked at the edge of the road, not blocking the driveway, but close enough to be deliberate. An old Ford of faded blue with a lumber rack on the back that held a few warped 2x4s and a toolbox secured with bungee cords. A man was standing at the property line, not on it but near it, looking at the house with the particular attention of someone who is reading a building the way other people read sentences. I was in his 70s, tall, slightly stooped at the shoulders with hands that were too large for the rest of him. The hands of someone who had spent decades gripping things, building things, taking things apart and putting them back together. He wore a canvas work jacket and a cap that said nothing on it, which in a world of branded caps felt like a statement of its own. Nora got out of the car. The man turned toward her without hurry. You're the one who bought the place. It was not a question. It was not a judgment. It was the kind of declarative sentence that people use when they have already decided what they think and are now simply confirming the facts. I am, Nora said. I'm Walt Emory. I live at the end of the road. The last house before the trees. Been there 41 years. She waited for the rest. The joke, the warning, the condescension. It did not come. Walt looked at the house again. He studied the roofline, the porch, the places where the siding had separated from the frame. His eyes moved the way a doctor's eyes move during examination, systematically without sentiment, cataloging damage and possibility in equal measure. My grandfather used to talk about this house, said it was built by a man from back east who got cheated out of his land, said the man buried something here before he died. I always figured it was one of those stories old people tell to make the past seem more interesting than it was. He looked at Nora. My grandfather was a carpenter, taught my father. My father taught me. I retired from the trade 8 years ago when my wife passed, and my hands started arguing with me about what they could still do. But they remember more than they've forgotten. He walked to the porch. He did not step onto it, he knew better. But he crouched and looked underneath at the foundation, at the support beams, at the joists that held the whole structure above the ground. Your porch is gone. Foundation shifted on the north side. Roof needs resheeting before the snow load gets serious, but the bones are good. Whoever built this house used white oak for the framing. White oak doesn't rot the way pine does. It fights back. He stood. He brushed dirt from his knees. I'm not offering to fix your house. That's too big for one man, even a man who wasn't 74. But I can show you what to do first. What matters and what can wait. And your boy. He gestured toward the window where Teddy's face was visible, watching. He's got the hands for it. I can see it from here. Nora felt something shift in her chest. Not hope. Something quieter. The recognition that she was not perhaps as alone as she had believed. Why, she asked. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Walt considered this. He took his time with it the way he seemed to take his time with everything. My wife was sick for 3 years before she died. Toward the end, I couldn't do anything for her except sit in the chair by her bed and hold her hand. After she was gone, I sat in that same chair for a long time because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Building something again, even something that isn't mine, that's not charity. That's medicine. He walked back to his truck, opened the toolbox, pulled out a level, a square, and a tape measure, held them up. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock, I'll bring wood for the porch jacks. You supply the coffee and the boy. He drove away without waiting for an answer. Walt came the next morning at 6:45. Nora had coffee ready brewed on the camping stove in a pot she'd bought at Goodwill for $2. He drank it without comment on the quality, which was the kindest thing he could have done. Then he walked Teddy through the house for an hour, pointing at things. This beam is load-bearing, that wall is cosmetic. See how the floor slopes here? That means the sill plate has moisture damage. We fix that first, or nothing else matters. Teddy listened the way only 14-year-old boys who have been starved for adult male attention can listen, completely without interruption, with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. He asked questions that surprised Walt. Why white oak instead of red? How do you know if a joist is compromised without tearing up the floor? What's the difference between structural failure and cosmetic damage? Walt answered each one with the patience of a man who has been waiting a long time for someone to ask. They started with the porch, not rebuilding it. They didn't have the materials for that, but stabilizing it so it would hold weight through the winter. Walt brought scrap lumber from his own garage wood he'd saved from jobs over the years, because a good carpenter never throws away good wood. Teddy hammered. He was bad at it at first. He bent nails. He split boards. He hit his thumb twice and did not cry either time, just shook his hand and picked up the hammer again. By the third day, his aim was better. By the fifth, Walt stopped correcting him. Iris watched from inside through the window she'd boarded herself. She did not join them on the porch. But Nora noticed that she had begun organizing Crawford's documents, sorting them chronologically, cross-referencing dates in the journal with the dates on the legal papers, building a timeline of the fraud that had stolen Crawford's land. She did this without being asked. When Nora looked at what she'd assembled, it was meticulous, color-coded with markers from her school backpack, and more thorough than anything Nora could have done herself. Iris caught her looking. AP history, she said. Might as well be useful for something. 1 week after the Cellar discovery, Garrett filed the quiet title claim. He called Nora that evening. It's done. Filed with the state circuit court this afternoon. The claim is on public record as of 5 o'clock. The explosion came the next morning. Nora knew it would come. She had braced for it the way people brace for storms. They can see on the horizon but cannot stop. But the speed of it, the force that she had not expected. By 9 a.m. the story was on every local news outlet. Woman who bought condemned house for 50 claims ownership of downtown Carverton. By noon it was statewide. By evening, national outlets had picked it up, the kind of story that algorithms love because it contains money and injustice and a protagonist who is easy to root for. Nora's phone, which she kept mostly off, showed 412 missed calls when she turned it on to check. Colton posted within hours, saw this coming. She's lost her mind. Feels sorry for the kids. The comment gathered, likes the way a wound gathers infection quickly, and with a kind of enthusiasm that revealed something unpleasant about the people pressing the button. But the public response was not uniformly hostile. Among the mockery and the disbelief, there were other voices. People who had lost homes, people who had been cheated, people who understood in ways they could not always articulate what it meant to find something valuable in a place everyone else had dismissed. A woman in Ohio shared the story with the comment. She bought a house for 15 and found out the whole town was living on her land. If that isn't God's sense of humor, I don't know what is. It was shared 40,000 times. Harlan Dunn did not find it funny. He arrived at 12,047 Olmsted Road 3 days after the filing in a black SUV that looked surgical against the overgrown yard. He wore a gray suit. He did not get out of the car immediately. He sat behind the tinted glass for a full minute. And Nora, watching from the parlor window, understood that the pause was intentional, a performance of power, the kind of move a man makes when he wants you to know he is deciding whether you are worth his time. She met him on the porch. She made him stand in the cold. His pitch was smooth. $500,000. Walk away from the claim. Drop the lawsuit. Start over somewhere comfortable. Think about your children. Nora let him finish. She let the silence after his last word expand until it became uncomfortable, until he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, until the confidence in his posture developed a slight crack. The land under your shopping center alone is worth north of 12 million in current market value. My lawyer has verified this. So no, Mr. Dunn, $500,000 is not appropriate. His face changed. The smoothness left it. Beneath was something harder, older, more accustomed to getting what it wanted. You're making a mistake you can't afford. I have lawyers who will bury you in motions for the next decade. I have resources you cannot imagine. You're living in a condemned house with no heat. How long do you think you can sustain this? Nora pulled the iron key from her pocket. She held it up not as a threat, but as a fact, the way a person holds up a passport at a border. Mr. Dunn, I am living in a condemned house with no heat because your town was built on stolen land. I have nothing left to lose. You have everything to lose. That arithmetic does not favor you, and we both know it. She put the key back. Don't come to my property again without an invitation. He left. The SUV's tires threw gravel against the porch steps. 4 days later, the demolition order arrived. It came not as a letter, but as a formal notice hand-delivered by a county code enforcement officer who looked apologetic and uncomfortable and who would not meet Nora's eyes. The Carverton Town Council, citing imminent public safety concerns, had issued an emergency demolition order for the structure at 10247 Olmsted Road. The property owner had 30 days to bring the structure into compliance with minimum safety and habitability standards. Failure to comply would result in forced demolition at the owner's expense. Nora read the notice twice. She understood immediately. Dunn had not come to negotiate. He had come to measure her resolve. And when he found it sufficient, he had activated the only weapon that could destroy her claim at its foundation, destroy the house itself. No house, no occupancy. No occupancy, no trust to claim. No trust to claim, no 320 acres. She had 30 days to make a condemned house pass a safety inspection. No money, no contractors, no professional help. She called Garrett. His response was blunt. The order is legal. Dunn didn't even have to push hard. The house genuinely doesn't meet code. The council has every right to enforce. Your only option is to comply. 30 days. That night, after Iris and Teddy had fallen asleep, Nora sat on the porch in the dark. The cold was bitter, the kind of Michigan cold that finds the spaces between clothing and skin and settles there like a passenger. She held the $15 bill she still carried in her coat pocket, now soft as cloth from being folded and unfolded so many times. She thought about tearing it, thought about driving to Colton's house and begging for help, thought about what it would feel like to quit, to admit that everyone who had laughed was right, that she was a woman who had spent her last money on a delusion. She did not tear it. She put it back in her pocket and went inside and made a list. Walt arrived the next morning without being called. Nora had not told him about the demolition order. He had heard. In a town the size of Carverton, information travels the way water travels downhill, quickly finding every crack. He stood in the kitchen with his coffee and looked at Nora's list. Roof, foundation, electrical, plumbing, windows, stairs, walls. Each item had a rough estimate of materials needed, which Nora had researched online the night before. You can do all this in 30 days, Walt said. I know, not alone you can't. He set the coffee down. He pulled out his phone, an old flip phone that he used exclusively for calls, never texts, and he dialed a number, then another, then another. Nora listened to his side of the conversations. They were short. They were factual. They contained no emotion and no persuasion. Just information, address, timeline, scope of work. The fact that the homeowner had no money. Each call ended the same way. If you can help, come. If you can't, I understand. By noon, 3 people were standing in Nora's yard. Alvin Stroud, 68, retired plumber, who had fixed pipes in Carverton for 35 years. Dottie Marchand, 61, who had painted houses for a living and still kept her brushes clean. And a younger man, maybe 40, named Curtis Reeves, who worked maintenance at the school and knew electrical systems because the school's wiring was older than most of its students. They did not introduce themselves with speeches. They walked through the house with Walt, assessed the damage, and began. The next day, 4 more people came, then 2 more, then 3. They were not organized. They did not have a plan. They came because Walt had called, or because someone Walt called had called someone else, or because they had driven past the house and seen people working and stopped to ask what was happening. They were retired tradespeople mostly, men and women who had spent their working lives building and fixing and maintaining things, and who now in their 60s and 70s found themselves with the skills that had nowhere to go and hands that still remembered how to be useful. Not all of them liked Nora. Some had laughed at the auction story. Some had shared the social media posts. But they were not there for Nora, not entirely. They were there because Harlan Dunn had raised the rent on 3 downtown storefronts last year, forcing 2 small businesses to close. Because Dunn had bought the old community center and turned it into a parking garage. Because Dunn had blocked the public access path to the lake so his development company could build condos. The people of Carverton had watched Dunn reshape their town into something that served him, and they had not known what to do about it. Now they knew. They could fix a house. The work was hard. Nora was in every room every day doing whatever was needed. She learned to measure and cut lumber from Walt. She learned to seal pipes from Alvin. She sanded floors on her knees until her arms ached and her palms blistered. And the blisters broke and she wrapped them in tape and kept sanding. Teddy worked beside Walt every morning before school and every evening after. And the change in him was visible, not just in the growing competence of his hands, but in the way he carried himself straighter, more certain, as if someone had finally shown him what his body was for. Iris resisted longer. She helped inside, organizing, cleaning, keeping the timeline of volunteers and the materials. But she did not pick up a hammer. She did not join the work on the porch or the roof. She watched from windows. She made coffee for the volunteers. And she continued building her case file on Crawford, which had grown from a few pages to a binder thick enough to impress Garrett when she brought it to his office. On the 14th day, the roof was resheeted. Alvin had connected a temporary water line from the well on the property. Well, nobody knew existed until Curtis found the cap buried under 3 feet of soil near the oak tree. Dottie and 2 friends had painted the exterior of the first floor. Not the whole house, just enough to show the inspector that the structure was being maintained. The porch was level. The stairs were reinforced. The windows had glass in them, not boards. It was not enough, not yet. The electrical system was still decades out of code. The second floor was still dangerous. The foundation on the north side still needed jacking. But it was something. It was movement. It was a condemned house, slowly, stubbornly refusing to stay condemned. On the 22nd night, the storm came. It arrived from the northwest, the way Michigan storms do in December. Not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had opened a door in the sky. Wind first hitting the house like a fist, rattling every window Dottie had just painted. Then snow thick and horizontal, driven by gusts that made the old oaks along Homestead Road groan in their roots. Then the sound that Nora would remember longer than any other sound in her life, the crack of roofing splitting, a section of the newly sheeted roof over the parlor, tearing away under a gust that the weather service would later clock at 61 miles per hour. Water came through immediately, not a drip, a pour. It hit the parlor floor and spread, soaking the hardwood. Nora had spent days sanding, pulling around the baseboards, reaching toward the dining room, where the trapdoor to Crawford's cellar was still covered only by the carpet remnants they had pulled back into place. Nora stood in the parlor. Water ran down the walls. Wind screamed through the gap in the roof. The flashlight in her hand illuminated a room that looked in that moment like the inside of a sinking ship. She reached into her coat pocket. The $15 bill was there, damp now, soft as a leaf. She held it in the flashlight beam. She thought about the moment on the bench, the moment at the auction, the moment in the cellar. All those moments when she had chosen to keep going, to believe that this house and these documents and this impossible claim were worth something. And now the roof was torn open and the water was rising, and the inspection was 8 days away, and she did not have the money to fix what the storm had just broken. She felt it, the impulse she had been fighting for weeks, the one that lived beneath the determination and the lists and the competence she wore like armor. The impulse to stop, to fold the $15 into her pocket and walk to the car and drive somewhere, anywhere, and let the house collapse and the claim expire and the whole desperate enterprise end the way everyone had predicted it would end. She sat on the wet floor. She put her head in her hands. The water soaked through her jeans. The wind moved through the house like a living thing, cold and indifferent and patient. Teddy found her. He came down the hall from the back room where he and Iris had been sleeping, his shoes, untied, his face tight with worry. He looked at the water, the torn roof, his mother on the floor. He did not say anything. He sat down next to her. The water soaked his pants, too. He did not move. Iris came a minute later. She brought the blanket from their room. She wrapped it around Nora's shoulders without asking. Then she sat on Nora's other side. 3 people on a wet floor in a broken house in the middle of a storm, not speaking, not moving, just sitting together in the wreckage of something they had been trying to build. The storm lasted until 4 a.m. When it stopped, the silence was so complete it felt like a new kind of sound. At 6:45, Nora heard the crunch of tires on snow. She went to the window. Walt's truck was in the driveway. Behind it, Alvin's van. Behind that, a car she didn't recognize. Then another truck. Then Dottie's station wagon. They came up the driveway in a line, 5 vehicles, 8 people, all of them carrying something: lumber, tarps, nails, a generator that Curtis had borrowed from the school without asking permission, and would return before anyone noticed. Walt walked to the porch. He looked up at the torn roof. He looked at Nora standing in the doorway, her eyes red, her clothes still damp, the blanket still around her shoulders. I've seen worse. January of '87, a storm took the whole north face off the Methodist church. We had it back up in 4 days. This is one section. We'll have it sealed by tonight and resheeted by Wednesday. He turned to the others. Alvin, you're on water damage. Curtis, generator and lights. Dottie, check the paint. Let's go. They went. Nora stood on the porch and watched them move through her yard with their tools and their lumber and their 70-year-old knees. And she understood something she had not understood before. She had thought she was alone. She had thought the house was hers to save or lose by herself. But Walt and Alvin and Dottie and Curtis and the others, they were not helping because she had asked. She had never asked. They were helping because the house had become theirs too, in the way that anything you pour labor into becomes partly yours. They were not saving Nora's house. They were saving their house, the one they had built together from nothing, the one that carried their work in its walls. Day 29. The inspector arrived. His name was Glenn Hutchins, a county employee with a clipboard and a demeanor that suggested he had been told to find problems and was looking forward to it. He walked through the house slowly. He checked the roof, the wiring, the plumbing, the foundation, the stairs. He measured things. He wrote things down. Nora followed him, answering questions, showing receipts for materials, explaining what had been done and what still needed doing. Hutchins finished his inspection in 90 minutes. He stood on the porch that Walt and Teddy had stabilized. The porch that was level for the first time in 30 years. And he looked at his clipboard for a long time. The structure meets minimum safety and habitability standards, barely. There are 19 items that will need to be addressed within 6 months for full code compliance. But as of today, the demolition order is not enforceable. He signed the form. He handed Nora a copy. He walked to his car without looking back. Nora stood on the porch with the signed form in her hands. Inside the house, she heard Teddy let out a sound, not a cheer, not a word, just a release of breath he had been holding for 30 days. Iris appeared in the doorway. She looked at the form. She looked at her mother. And for the first time since the divorce, she smiled at Nora without reservation, without the protective distance she had maintained for months, without the anger that had become her armor. "We passed," Nora said. Iris nodded. Her chin trembled. She went back inside quickly, the way people do when they don't want to be seen crying. That evening, Nora called Garrett. Demolition order lifted. The house stands. What's next is the hearing. Judge Halsey has it scheduled for February. The Property Owners Consortium Dunn's people filed a motion to dismiss. I've responded. The judge will hear arguments and decide whether the claim proceeds. Are we going to win? Garrett was quiet for a moment. Our case is strong. The documents are authentic. The legal framework is sound. But Nora Dunn is not going to rely on lawyers alone. He'll look for other ways to undermine you. Be careful. 2 days later, Nora learned what careful meant. Colton called. She did not answer. He called again. She did not answer. He sent a text. We need to talk about the property claim. It's urgent for the kids. She did not respond. The next morning, Garrett called, and his voice had the particular tension of a man delivering news he wishes he did not have to deliver. Colton filed a motion this morning. He's claiming that because your divorce settlement did not explicitly exclude future property acquisitions made with marital settlement funds, the $3,000 you received, he has a co-ownership interest in any assets derived from that settlement, including the house, including the trust claim. Nora's hand tightened on the phone. He's arguing that the $15 you used to buy the house came from the settlement, which was marital property, and therefore the house and everything associated with it is jointly owned. He's partnered with Dunn's legal team. They filed together. The kitchen was quiet. Through the window, Nora could see the oak tree Crawford had planted 130 years ago, its branches heavy with snow, its trunk wider than her arms could reach. It had survived every winter since 1891. It had watched the house decay and the land change hands through fraud, and the decades pass without anyone coming to claim what was buried beneath its roots. Nora looked at the tree and felt the ground shift under her again. Not literally, but in the way it shifts when the person you once loved uses the law as a weapon for the second time, when the man who took everything finds a way to take even the thing you found in the rubble he left behind. Her voice when she spoke was very quiet. Can he do this? Garrett exhaled. It's a reach, a significant reach, but the judge will have to consider it. And if Colton can establish even a partial ownership claim, Dunn's consortium can negotiate with him instead of you. They'll settle for pennies. Colton will take whatever Dunn offers, and you'll be left with a house and no claim to the land. Through the window. Teddy was outside clearing snow from the path Walt had taught him to maintain. He moved with purpose, now shoulders back steps, deliberate the posture of a boy who has learned what his hands can do. He did not know that inside the house his mother was being told that his father had found a way to take everything. Again. Nora set the phone down. She placed both palms flat on the counter she had scrubbed and sealed herself. The counter that still smelled faintly of the lemon oil Dottie had brought. And she stood there, not moving, not speaking, feeling the cold of the old wood through her skin. The iron key hung on a cord around her neck now. She had started wearing it after the storm when she realized that pockets could be emptied, but a thing worn close to the body stays. It rested against her sternum, heavy, warm from her skin. She closed her fingers around it through the fabric of her shirt, and held it the way people hold things when they need to remember that something solid still exists. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the house settled and creaked around her, the way it always did, the sounds of old wood adjusting to cold. The sounds of a structure that had been built to endure exactly this. Not just weather, but the slow, relentless pressure of people trying to tear it down. Garrett called back the following morning. He had not slept. Nora could hear it in his voice, the particular roughness of a man who had spent the night reading the same documents over and over, searching for something he was not sure existed. She knew the sound because she had made it herself in the weeks after the divorce, lying awake in the apartment with eviction notices in the kitchen drawer, reading job listings until the words blurred. "I need to see the trust document again," he said. "The original. Not my copy. The original from the box." She drove to the cellar and brought it to his office. Garrett spread it across his desk and read it with a magnifying glass. Not because the text was small, but because he was looking for language, for the precise legal phrasing that might mean the difference between keeping everything and losing it all. Nora sat across from him and waited. She had learned in the past 3 months that waiting was its own kind of labor, and that the people who survived were not always the ones who moved fastest, but the ones who could sit still longest without breaking. Garrett stopped on the third page. He read a passage. He read it again. He set down the magnifying glass and pressed both hands flat on the desk, and Nora watched the tension leave his shoulders. Not all of it, but enough. "Crawford was smarter than we thought," he said. "Smarter than anyone who has ever tried to take this land." He turned the document so Nora could read the passage he had found. The language was old, formal, layered with the kind of legal construction that 19th century attorneys used when they wanted something to be not just enforceable but indestructible. But the meaning, once Garrett translated it, was clear. The trust did not grant ownership to whoever held the deed to the house at 1247 Olmsted Road. It granted ownership to whoever occupied and inhabited the property as their primary and continuous dwelling. The distinction was deliberate. Crawford had anticipated 130 years ago in a cellar he had dug with his own hands that someone might try to claim the house through paperwork alone, through legal maneuvering, through the same kind of documentary fraud that had stolen his land. So he had written the trust to protect against exactly that. The inheritance belonged not to the person whose name was on a deed, but to the person who lived in the house, who slept on its floors, who repaired its walls, who endured its winters. Colton had never set foot in 1247 Olmsted Road. He had never hammered a nail, never patched a roof, never sat on a cold floor during a storm with his children beside him. He had filed a motion from a warm office claiming ownership of something he had never touched. And Crawford's trust, written before Colton's grandparents were born, had already rendered that motion meaningless. Nora read the passage 3 times. The 4th time, her vision blurred, and she realized she was crying. Not from relief, not from joy, from something deeper. The recognition that a man she had never met, dead for over a century, had understood something about injustice that was so fundamental it transcended time. He had known that the powerful would use paper to steal what others had built with their hands. And he had written his defense in the same language they used, but aimed it at their weakness. The fact that they would never, under any circumstances, lower themselves to actually live in the thing they were trying to take. Garrett filed a response to Colton's motion the next day. It was 4 pages long. It cited the trust clause verbatim. It included a detailed chronology of Nora's occupancy dates, photographs, affidavits from Walt and Alvin and Dottie, confirming her continuous residence receipts for materials she had purchased, the signed inspection report from Glenn Hutchins. And it ended with a single sentence that Garrett had crafted with the precision of a man who understood that legal briefs, at their best, are a form of storytelling. The respondent, Colton Ellsworth, has never entered, occupied, repaired, improved, or slept one night in the property at 147 Olmsted Road, and therefore holds no claim under the Crawford Trust, which requires not ownership on paper, but presence in fact. Colton's lawyers requested a 2-week extension to respond. The judge granted 1 week. The response, when it came, was thin procedural arguments, technical objections, requests for further discovery. Garrett read it and called Nora with 2 words: they're drowning. The hearing was set for a Friday in late February. Northern Michigan in late February is a study in endurance. The snow has been on the ground for months. The light arrives late and leaves early, and the cold has settled into the bones of every building and every person who has not yet given up and gone south. Nora woke that morning in the back room of the house, the room where she had slept the first night with a single candle, the room that now had heat, a wood stove. Walt had installed from his own garage a stove that had warmed his house for 20 years and now warmed hers. She dressed in clothes. Iris had helped her choose from the Goodwill on Route 31 a dark blazer that fit well enough. A pair of slack shoes that did not have holes. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. A bathroom that now had running water thanks to Alvin, and saw a woman she almost recognized. Not the woman who had been Mrs. Colton Ellsworth, groomed and polished and invisible. Not the woman on the bench with $15 hollowed by despair. Someone between those two. Someone who had been emptied out and was filling back up with different material. Garrett met her at the courthouse steps. His arms were full of documents. His tie was slightly crooked. He looked nervous, which was unusual for a man who had spent his career in courtrooms. And Nora understood that the nervousness was not about the law. It was about her. He did not want to fail her again. She straightened his tie. He looked startled. "We're going to be fine," she said. And she was surprised to find that she meant it. Not because she was certain of the outcome, but because certainty was no longer the thing she needed. She had lived without it for months. She had built something in its absence. The courtroom was full. One side held Dunn's legal team, 5 attorneys in matching dark suits, a paralegal with a laptop. Dunn himself in the second row with the composed expression of a man who has never lost anything he considered important. Colton sat behind them, separate but aligned, wearing a suit Nora recognized from their marriage. He did not look at her when she entered. He looked at his phone. Judge Margaret Halsey called the hearing to order. She was a woman in her 60s with short gray hair and a voice that carried the authority of someone who had spent decades listening to people lie and had developed an efficient method for sorting truth from performance. Dunn's lead attorney spoke first. His name was Leland Cross, and he was very good measured, articulate, aware of when to push and when to let silence do the work. He argued adverse possession. He argued laches that Crawford's claim had been abandoned through inaction for over a century. He argued economic catastrophe. If the claim were upheld, hundreds of property owners would face the loss of their buildings, their businesses, their livelihoods. He spoke for 70 minutes and did not waste a sentence. Then Garrett stood. He was not Leland Cross. He did not have the polish, the tailoring, the institutional confidence of a man backed by a firm with 40 attorneys. He had a cluttered desk and a flip phone and a case he had taken on contingency because a woman with no money had spread a dead man's papers across his desk and asked him to believe her. But he had something Cross did not. He had spent 3 months inside the documents. He knew every date, every signature, every clause. He had Iris's binder color-coded cross-referenced meticulous, and he walked the judge through it with the patience of a man who trusts the material to speak for itself. He showed how the state deed predated all local claims. He explained the trust mechanism. He addressed every argument Cross had made, not with rhetoric, but with evidence. He read Crawford's journal entry aloud. The one about truth resting beneath the feet of thieves, and the courtroom was quiet in a way that courtrooms rarely are, the quiet of people hearing something that feels true. He spoke for 2 hours. When he finished, Judge Halsey sat back and was silent for a long time. "This is an extraordinary case," she said. "The documentation is extensive, and as far as I can determine from the materials presented, authentic. The state deed is properly filed and recorded. The trust mechanism is legally sound. The occupancy clause is clear and based on the evidence satisfied by the plaintiff." She paused. "However, the practical implications of a full ruling are staggering. I am taking this under advisement. Both parties will receive my decision within 30 days. This hearing is adjourned." As the room emptied, Nora saw Dunn pull Garrett aside. She watched them talk. Dunn's posture shifting from rigid to uncertain, Garrett's remaining steady. When Garrett returned, the small smile on his face was the first she had seen from him in weeks. "He wants to negotiate." Nora nodded. "Then we negotiate. But not today. Let them sit with it the way we've been sitting with it since November." The 30 days passed. Nora continued living in the house. She continued working on it. There were still 19 code items to address, and she addressed them one by one with Walt and Teddy, and whoever else showed up on a given morning. The national attention had brought donations, small ones, $10 here, 20 there, from people across the country who had read the story and wanted to be part of it. Nora used every dollar for materials. On day 26, Garrett called. "They want to settle. All of them done the consortium, the city. Joint offer. $8 million plus legal fees plus 1 year to transition." Nora listened. She let the number exist in the air between them. 8 million. More money than she had ever imagined. College for Iris and Teddy. Security, safety, the end of cold floors and empty cupboards, and the particular arithmetic of poverty that requires you to choose between food and heat. "What do you think?" she asked. Garrett chose his words carefully. "If this goes to trial, you might win more. You might also lose. Judges are human. 8 million is generational wealth, Nora. Your children would never have to worry." Counter Nora said. 10 million. Plus I keep the house and the 2 acres. They can have the rest. Nora, the house is mine. The house is mine. Josiah Crawford built it. He hid his legacy in its cellar. I found it because I was desperate enough to buy what no one else wanted. This house saved me, and I am not leaving it. There was a pause on the line. "There's one more thing," Nora said. "I want 2 acres in the commercial district set aside for a public park, named for Crawford, non-negotiable." Garrett relayed the terms. The consortium countered at 9. Nora held at 10. They came back within the hour. 10 million. The house, the park, done. The signing took place in Garrett's office on a Tuesday afternoon in late March. Outside, the first warmth of a Michigan spring was loosening the ice on the eaves, and the sound of meltwater dripping from the roof was steady and rhythmic, like a clock that had started keeping a different kind of time. Nora sat at Garrett's desk with the settlement agreement in front of her. 12 pages, $10 million minus Garrett's contingency fee, which would leave her with roughly 7 million a number. So large it felt fictional, like a word in a language she was still learning to speak. She picked up the pen. She held it the way she had held the $15 on the bench, the way she had held the iron key in the cellar, with the full weight of knowing that what she was about to do would change everything. And that the everything it would change included things she could not yet see. She signed. Then she set the pen down and looked at Garrett, and her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. You believed me when the whole town was laughing. You took a case with no retainer from a woman living in a condemned house. I will never forget that. Garrett's eyes were not entirely dry either. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with his tie, which was the thing he did when he needed a moment. You believed yourself first. I just followed. Nora did not buy a house in Riverside Heights, where she had lived as Mrs. Colton Ellsworth. She stayed at 247 Olmsted Road. She hired contractors, carefully chosen, most of them people who had already worked on the house as volunteers to complete the renovation. They stabilized the foundation. They rebuilt the second floor. They restored the wraparound porch and the gingerbread trim, and the tall windows that Crawford had designed to catch the morning light off the lake. They did not make it modern. They made it what it had been, a Victorian home built by a man who had intended it to last, and who, against all odds, had been right. In the dining room floor, Nora had them install a panel of tempered glass over the trapdoor to Crawford's cellar. Below, visible through the glass, was the oak table and the carved box where she had found the documents that had changed her life. A brass plaque was mounted on the wall nearby. It read, "The Crawford legacy. Sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden where proud people refuse to look." She established the Crawford House Foundation in April. Its offices were in a renovated storefront on Main Street on land that until recently had belonged to her, and its mission was specific: emergency housing, legal assistance, job training, and microloans for single mothers in crisis. The foundation operated with a staff of 4 and a board that included Garrett Walt and Alma Ogden, who had retired from the clerk's office and now volunteered 3 days a week because, as she put it, she had spent 31 years filing papers for the county and wanted to spend whatever years she had left filing papers that actually helped someone. Iris graduated high school in June, valedictorian, with a scholarship to the University of Michigan. She was going to study law. Like Mr. Fielding, she told people when they asked. When they asked why, she said, "Because someone has to be in the room when the other side has 5 lawyers and you have 1. And that one has to be good enough." Teddy Quieter, as always, enrolled in a vocational program that combined high school coursework with carpentry apprenticeship. When his guidance counselor asked why carpentry, he thought about it for a while, the way he thought about everything. Slowly, thoroughly, with the attention of someone who had learned that the right answer is worth waiting for. "Because Walt taught me that the thing you build with your hands carries your name, even when you don't sign it. I want to build things that last, like this house, like the man who built it 130 years ago." As for Colton, he called twice after the settlement. The first time to ask for money, the second time to suggest reconciliation. Nora did not return either call. She had moved past him entirely, the way a river moves past a stone, not by fighting it, but by finding the path around it and continuing. Her life was no longer defined by what he had taken. It was defined by what she had found. On a Saturday in November, 1 year to the day after the auction, Nora held a gathering on the porch of the restored house. Not a party, something quieter. She invited Garrett and his wife. She invited Alvin Dottie Curtis and every person who had showed up during those 30 desperate days to fix a house they had no reason to fix. She invited 20 single mothers who were receiving help from the Crawford House Foundation. She invited Alma Ogden, who brought a casserole and the original envelope that had held the skeleton key, which she had kept in her desk drawer for 3 decades. Nora spoke from the porch. She did not use notes. She did not raise her voice. She spoke the way she had learned to speak in this house, directly without performance, trusting the words to carry their own weight. A year ago, I stood in this yard and believed I had made the worst decision of my life. I had spent my last $15 on a ruin. Everyone said I was foolish. And maybe I was. Maybe desperation is just another word for the kind of courage that doesn't know any better. But Josiah Crawford hid something in this house over 100 years ago, and he waited longer than any of us can imagine for someone to find it. I think he was waiting for someone who knew what it meant to have everything taken. Someone who would not walk past a locked door because they had been told it wasn't worth opening. She paused. The porch was quiet. The crowd was quiet. A breeze moved through the oaks along Homestead Road, and the last leaves of autumn drifted across the yard in the late afternoon light. I don't know if I deserved what he left. I don't think that's the right question. The right question is what you do with the thing you find when you're at the bottom. Do you keep it for yourself? Or do you turn it into something that outlasts you? Crawford buried his truth because he believed someone would come. And now we are here, all of us, standing on a porch that was falling down a year ago in a house that was supposed to be demolished, proving that he was right. Walt stood at the edge of the porch, leaning against the railing he had built himself. He did not clap. He did not speak. He held a cup of coffee in hands that were large and rough and 74 years old. And he looked out at the road he had lived on for 4 decades, and his expression held something that Nora had seen only once before in the cellar, the night she had read Crawford's journal, the moment she understood that patience exercised long enough becomes its own kind of power. Later, after the guests had gone and the dishes were washed, and Iris and Teddy had gone upstairs to rooms that were now warm and dry and theirs, Nora stood alone in the parlor. The house was quiet. The wood stove ticked as it cooled. Through the window, the oak tree was a silhouette against a sky just beginning to fill with stars, the kind of sky you only see in places where the lights are few and the darkness is honest. On the wall above the fireplace hung 2 objects. The first was the $15 bill, the 10 and the 5, creased and soft-mounted behind glass in a simple oak frame Walt had made in his workshop. Below it on a small iron hook hung the skeleton key, its clover-shaped bow catching the firelight, its teeth worn smooth by the century it had spent waiting in a dead man's cellar. Beneath both a brass plaque. 3 words, best investment ever. Nora stood in the quiet room and looked at the things on the wall. $15 and an iron key. One had bought a house nobody wanted. The other had opened a box nobody knew existed. Together, they had unlocked a future that every person in her life, her ex-husband, the developers, the laughing crowd at the auction had told her did not belong to her. Through the glass panel in the dining room floor, the cellar was dark. The oak table was still there, and the carved box empty now. Its contents distributed across courtrooms and archives and the Foundation's records. But the space itself remained cool, dry, patient, built to outlast the corruption above it. Josiah Crawford had carved it from stone with his own hands, and it had held his secret for 130 years. And now it held something else, the proof that desperate choices, made by dismissed people in impossible circumstances, sometimes lead to places that no amount of money or power or certainty could have predicted. Outside, the last leaves settled on the ground. The first frost of the season was forming on the grass, thin and glittering, turning the yard into something that looked in the starlight like a field of quiet silver. On the porch between 2 planks that Walt and Teddy had laid side by side last December, a cluster of wild asters had pushed through late bloomers, purple and small, growing in the crack between the boards, because no one had told them they couldn't. Walt had seen them during the renovation. Nora had asked if they should seal the gap. He had looked at the flowers for a moment, then at her, and said the only thing worth saying. Some things grow best in the places nobody planted them. I'd leave those be. She had left them. They were still there. And in the cooling November evening, with the house warm behind her, and the stars thickening overhead, and her children asleep in rooms they would never be evicted from, Nora Ellsworth closed her eyes and felt something that was not happiness exactly, and not peace exactly, but the place where those two things meet, the still point at the center of a life that had been broken apart and reassembled, piece by piece, nail by nail, choice by choice, into something that held. If this story stayed with you tonight, if you have ever been laughed at for a choice no one else understood, if you have ever held your last dollar and wondered whether it was enough, leave one word in the comments. One word that describes what you would do with $15 if it was all you had left. Because Nora's story is not about money. It is not about land or legal documents or a settlement with 7 zeros. It is about the moment you decide that the thing everyone else has given up on, the house, the dream, the version of yourself that still believes, is worth $15 and everything that comes after. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Someone who is sitting in their own version of a condemned house, wondering if they made the wrong choice. Tell them what Josiah Crawford knew, what Walt Emery showed with his hands, what Nora proved with hers, that the things nobody wants are sometimes the things nobody understands. That truth buried for a century still rises, that the strongest roots grow through cracks, and that sometimes, not always, but sometimes the worst investment you ever made turns out to be the only one that mattered. Welcome to our family. Welcome to Dreams Don't Age. See you in the next story. 3 years later, the Crawford House Foundation had helped 214 single mothers rebuild their lives. The Crawford Memorial Park, 2 acres of green in the middle of downtown Carverton, had a playground, a community garden, and a bench with a plaque that read, "For the ones who were told they had nothing and proved they had everything." Iris was in her second year of law school. Teddy had built his first house from the ground up, a small cottage on the edge of town, for a family that had been living in their car. Walt Emery, 77, now helped him frame it. They worked side by side the way they had always worked, without unnecessary words, measuring, twice cutting, once trusting the wood to tell them what it needed. And at 1247, Homestead Road, in a house that had been condemned and resurrected, and filled with the kind of life it had waited 130 years to hold, the $15 bill hung on the wall above a skeleton key, and the wild asters grew between the porch boards, and the oak tree Crawford had planted cast its shadow across a yard where children played who would never know what it meant to have nowhere to go. Because someone had made sure of that. Someone who had once sat on a bench with nothing and chosen to spend it.